Hi. Um, I want to discuss the symbiosis, as I see it, between the far left and radical movements like Black Lives Matter, um, and specifically the racism of groups like Black Lives Matter, which is absolutely real, and there's plenty of evidence for it. Um, because I think this is a very noticeable phenomenon that far left groups and far left ideologues, often white, incidentally, tend to really toe the line when it comes to minority racism, as an example. So I've read a report about a young woman who was murdered in Indianapolis. This is from the Daily Mail. I'll just read out the subheadings. And this is quotation. Good riddance to another racist. Black Lives Matter supporters post hateful messages on Facebook page of a young mum, 24, who was shot dead moments after she said all lives matter during an argument. Jessica Doty Whitaker, 24, was shot dead on July the 5th in Indianapolis, Indiana. Whitaker, her fiance Jose Ramirez, and two others. That's interesting. Obviously, she has a Hispanic fiance, and two others were repeatedly walking along the canal when one of them allegedly used the M word. A nearby group of people heard the phrase and an argument broke out. The other group reportedly began shouting Black Lives Matter, prompting Whitaker to respond All Lives Matter. Um, the the group then settled their differences and parted ways before someone opened fire on Whitaker moments later, killing her. Hundreds of people have commented on posts on Whitaker's Facebook page in recent days, with several sharing scathing messages accusing her of being racist. Some of them are very vitriolic and hateful. Um, this is a tragic example of where America is at right now, and an accompanying picture of this young woman. A few things to point out. The report doesn't say that it was her that used the M word. Clearly, someone in her group did, and that was wrong. They shouldn't have. But you will never convince me that a racist word is worse than a racist murder. It's just not. Um, I hope the person or people responsible are arrested, charged, and imprisoned for this evil crime. But there's things that are noticeable about cases like this. Will they be discussing this on CNN for an hour? Absolutely not. They will totally ignore it. Don Lemon will do his little sound bites about how awful things are for black Americans whilst he actively ignores cases like this. Um, I remember Don Lemon, and I'm singling him out because I think he's one of the worst race baiters on CNN. There's others as well as white race baiters as well, but I remember Don Lemon once saying, I think it was an interview with Morgan Freeman some years ago, he said, I'm so drained of talking about race. Yet it is people like Don Lemon and others who are so selective in their outrage that it's, from a journalistic perspective, it's very unprofessional, but it's also, in my view, Cardis. It's Cardis because it isn't telling the whole picture. When they have the power of that platform, make no mistake about it, someone like Don Lemon is in a very powerful position. Now, they will ignore this, even though this is a young mother brutally murdered because of a racial altercation. Um, but I mentioned at the start of the video the symbiosis between the far left and groups like Black Lives Matter. On the thread where this was being discussed, there was actually a guy from Newcastle, and I know he's from Newcastle. I've had a few exchanges with him. He's white and he's pretty far left, and he was saying, "Oh well, racists get what they deserve," because someone from her group purportedly used a racist word. But what that amounts to basically is, okay, we are therefore entitled to murder our opponents. It's chilling, actually. It's communism. It's sort of thing that go went on in communist states and fascist states, of course, as well. It's totalitarianism, and I honestly think there's certain white activists who are so consumed by their Marxist dogma of white guilt that they will actively promote, encourage, and condone black and brown racists. But when you think about it, there's actually a racist attitude in of itself with this, because they're holding black and brown people to a lower standard. In other words, they're saying, oh, well, they're not really responsible for their words. It's all to do with the white systemic racism. So when a black or brown person does come out with a racist attitude or a racist statement, they get condoned because, oh, well, it's just a natural response to systemic white racism. Dehumanizing and showing hatred against all white people is fine. I'm white myself, but I'm an ally, so that's fine. Um, I really find it hard to have any respect for these people. I'm talking about white allies who turn a blind eye to this stuff. I'm not talking about white people who feel that there is injustice out there. I'm not talking, for example, about white people who say there needs to be justice in the George Floyd or Eric Garner cases. I'm a white person who has said that. That is not what I'm talking about, nor am I attacking everyone on the political left. But irrefutably, there is, I mean, you see this from Antifa. Antifa claim to be anti-fascists. They're actually a bunch of violent thugs. Um, as Majid Nawaz pointed out, there are examples in history where movements have started off on the political left, or at least as radical outsiders who say that they're taking on the conservative establishment. And I mean, an example of this is the early Nazi brown shirts who, engaged in street violence under Weimar Germany. Well, Weimar Germany might have been politically liberal compared to Nazism, but the Nazis certainly saw it as conservative establishment. And so you had that sort of street thuggery. Today, we see Antifa activists engaging in violence, covering their faces, violently attacking political opponents, and they do it all under the guise of being anti fascist, when in reality they are behaving in the fascist way. They are the ones who are violently trying to crush any dissenting views. They're the ones who believe in physically attacking political opponents. They're the ones who believe in denouncing people. These are all totalitarian tracks with both fascism and communism. So Antifa, it really, I find it very striking that just saying you're anti-fascist somehow, they think it's an excuse. They think it kind of gives them a cover. Well, anyone could call themselves anti-fascist. I mean, technically, Stalin was the biggest anti-fascist in history. Yet he killed millions of people. In the sense that he was in total war with Hitler's forces, a total war in which at least 21 million Soviets died and at least 6 million Germans. So, that was an example of an anti fascist taking on fascism. And yet, so many of Stalin's victims had nothing to do with the Third Reich. They were, just from the wrong group of peasants, the kulaks early on, and uh, victims of the Holodomor in Ukraine. There's a very, very, very dark track record when it comes to the far left. Um, and what troubles me more, I mean, it would be easy to dismiss these people as extremists. They're in a minority. Let's not worry about them. But what we do see is supposedly mainstream organizations, particularly I'm thinking of media organizations like CNN and the BBC, will actively promote certainly racism when it comes from minorities. I mean, the amount of virtue signaling that was done towards Black Lives Matter early on, a couple of people have distanced themselves from it now. Keir Starmer, I think that was one of his biggest mistakes as leader so far, taking that knee. A very bad idea. It's it's becoming a sectarian symbol, and I think it's no different from the Black Power salute. Um, but in the case of America, when you add guns to the fact that there's unfortunately going to be more cases like this, It may well be that someone in her group was being racist, but then you add guns to the equation. It just, um, where is this going to end? I think it's fair to say the United States is already in the worst position it's been in, certainly since 1992 and the Los Angeles riots in terms of race relations. But it is definitely spreading now to the UK. Incidentally, that statue that was put up in Bristol of Jen Reid, I'm pleased to say it was taken down. And already some people are twisting that. They're saying, "Oh, look, this is the problem with Britain. They celebrate a slave trader, but bring down a statue of a black woman, even though um, even though the issue is not that it was taken down because she's a member of Black Lives Matter. It was taken down by the way the city council is held by led by a black mayor. It was taken down because it had no permission, and I see they're going to charge the artists. I hope they do, because there's a cost for the council doing that, taking it down. So I hope Mark Quinn does get charged. Um, I mean, it's I think it might be for another reason as well, and this is just speculation on my part, but I think it's because they knew full well that there would have been a counter vandalism, that the statue would have got vandalized, and it would have provoked, racial tensions in Bristol. Bristol's a city that's had its fair share of riots, some of them race related. So maybe the council thought, oh, we better take this down quickly because if some, anti-BLM people decide to vandalize it, then it's going to really inflame things here. So it's a practical step. But they had 23 hours, so I have no sympathy. I have no sympathy because I think Mark Quinn, um, he obviously didn't have confidence in the public supporting his work. It's an interesting thing. It shows they're all democratic. I mean, if there's such support for Black Lives Matter, wouldn't they have the confidence for the wider Bristol public to say, oh, yeah, this is wonderful. It's an empowered young black woman. Let's put her up. Let's celebrate her, even though she's done nothing of note. I mean, I honestly think Jen Reid thinks she's some sort of latter day Malcolm X, but she's done nothing. All she's done is stand up on a plinth and put her fist up in the air. Um, she hasn't been through the sort of things that the black activists of the 1960s went through. It's ridiculous false equivalency. Incidentally, I had a debate with a Nigerian Black Lives Matter activist recently, and I didn't mention it at the time, maybe I should have, but she comes from a country where 53,000 people have died in the insurgency led by Boko Haram. 53,000. And yet she's in the UK campaigning about systemic white racism here. Well, what about the rampant persecution of Christians, Nigerian Christians, by Boko Haram? I do question that. I do question why um, American agitators are coming in, far left agitators trying to stir things up here. And it's not to say that society is perfect. It's not to say that there aren't issues faced by black people. That's never been my position. But my position is that these double standards are fueling the flames. They're absolutely fueling the flames because a lot of people look at that and they feel angry. They think these big, powerful organizations, BBC, CNN, the government, they don't hold the same standards. So, white working class people, as an example, do feel utterly marginalized. They feel utterly, utterly ignored. And I'm not saying the right approach to black racism is white racism. I would say well clear of any sort of racism, obviously. So, some people, for example, would respond to a black or brown racist by making racially charged terms about all black people. That's stupid, and it's just as wrong as when they do it about all white people. But I do think that there should be a lot of pressure put on the likes of the BBC to start being more professional and start being more consistent. Um, if I ever appear on Question Time, which is unlikely, but if I ever did, I think I would say something along the lines of, okay, I'm never going to be invited on this show again, but this has to be said. This organisation, the BBC, has not been consistent. They ignored the grooming gangs. They have ignored cases where a white person has been a victim of a hate crime. They've ignored it. They fueled the flames. I would do the same thing on CNN. Now, in both cases, I would never be invited on again, or they'd probably try to cut it off or something like that. But I honestly think it's the only way to expose their hypocrisy. And yes, you can find hypocrisy on the other side. I mean, Fox News, for example, in case anyone accuses me of missing the mark on this, Fox News would be totally okay with the Second Amendment militia types who stormed the state capitol earlier this year. I haven't forgotten that. And they were almost entirely white. I think that's wrong. I think they were behaving like thugs, and I think they should be called out. But it's when these double standards are so promoted, it is so important that we stay by our own values and we don't go off course, and we are not intimidated by fools who want to throw around terms like racist when it isn't valid. So it's very sad what's happened to this young woman, but I don't think it's going to be the last such case. Um, and it really is time. I would like to see Joe Biden distance himself from Black Lives Matter. I think, I'll make more videos about the American political situation in due course, but I think if Trump does win re-election this year, there's many reasons why he might lose. There's a lot of points that I think have weakened Trump. However, one thing that has weakened Biden, I think, is that Trump may manage to effectively say that he's the candidate for law and order. And also the China issue, I think Biden may be portrayed as soft on China. I'm not saying he necessarily is, but the Democrats are so hung up on identity politics and political correctness that they're construing criticism of China as xenophobic. And we've had it here as well. The Daily Mirror came out with a ridiculous editorial where they were making that argument about our Huawei decision. So Biden, of course, he has to show he's different than Trump, but he has to be very careful not to look as if he is turning a blind eye to disorder. I know he's condemned the violence, I know he's condemned the looting, but he has to go a bit further. He has to be prepared, to put it bluntly, to upset Black Lives Matter, or at least not to kowtow to them. So if I were the Biden campaign, I would be saying there is a lot of anger in this country. There's a lot of hurts. We want to listen to our black citizens and their concerns. But a president of the United States cannot support an organization that has engaged in violence, that has engaged in anarchy. I mean, Trump's record on this is shameful. Trump has actually said he doesn't know who the KKK are. So Trump's done it on the other side. Trump has effectively kowtowed to white nationalist groups, and then he played innocent like he didn't know who they were. But I think Biden's doing it on the other extreme. A good, strong, centrist president, moderate president, would be very careful about associating themselves with any such movement. Um, so Biden needs to show that he's not going to be a pushover in law and order, that he will be a president who is on the side of the rule of law. And he can do that whilst also calling for prison reform and police reform. It's not like one or the other. I think it's possible to be both. I really do. And there has been examples of it. Anyway, I'll round this up. It's a very sad situation. And I think a lot of the toxic side of the American identity politics are coming over here. I'm not saying that they weren't here to begin with, but I definitely think some of the rhetoric of late has been American import. Some of the divisions have been American import, to be quite honest, from the American left. We don't need it.